Jason walked the streets of his hometown as though he were walking through the ruins of the past. Everything seemed smaller. The houses, the alleys, even the sky. He hadn't returned for nostalgia, more out of a sense of duty. Tom, his old friend, had called him for a beer, and he had come. The bar was in the same place, with the same crack in the sign and the same door that smelled of rot. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco, fried onions, and something indescribably weary. He had barely taken a step when the familiar feeling hit him, like something was wrong. And he was right. At the counter stood a guy holding the wrist of a girl. She wasn't screaming, just staring with silent fear. And Jason already knew who it was. Jason had only sat down at the table with Tom and hadn't even picked up his glass yet when he felt it. Something was off in the room. Too many glances, aimed not at him but at the counter. The sound, soft but sharp, the metallic clink of a tray, a nervous chuckle and a woman's voice, restrained but full of tension. "Please, I'm just working." Jason lifted his gaze. The girl, young, barely in her 20s, with dark hair tied in a ponytail and an apron that showed the uncertainty of a newcomer, stood with a tray in her hands, and her wrist was held by the guy with the self-satisfied smile. His face seemed vaguely familiar. "What are you staring at?" "I just asked her to have a drink with me," he said, tightening his grip on her wrist. She tried to pull away but failed. People around pretended nothing was happening. Only Tom grimaced and muttered, "Damn, it's Josh Randy." The name hit Jason's memory like a punch. Randy, his father. The man Jason had personally arrested during a night operation, back when the city still believed in justice. And now the son of that man was standing at the bar, strong, young, with eyes filled with inherited rage. "Does he come here often?" Jason asked quietly. "Every week. Thinks the place is his now. His dad's locked up and he's playing God. The locals are scared. He's always picking fights," muttered Tom. Jason sighed. In moments like these, his brain kicked in before his conscience. He stood up. Just stood up. He walked slowly toward them, not hiding his footsteps. Josh turned away from the girl, glanced at him, and smirked. "Hey, old man, you lost. This isn't the Veterans Club. Here we're having fun." Jason didn't respond. He looked at Josh's hand, squeezing the girl's wrist, then at the girl. She was gasping for air, her eyes pleading. There was too much in her gaze that Jason had seen before, once in another city, with another person, who stayed silent because he was scared. "Let her go," Jason said calmly. A silence fell over the bar. Even the music from the speakers seemed to dim. "And who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" Josh sneered, not loosening his grip on the girl. "Are you her daddy? Or just another hero trying to save the poor waitress?" He took a step closer to Jason. Their faces were inches apart. The smell of cheap cologne and whiskey hit Jason's nostrils. Josh was taller, bulkier, but not more dangerous. "You look like those guys we usually knock out at the back exit. Time for retirement, old man." Jason didn't blink. He kept his eyes locked on Josh's, seeing a reflection of the person he'd arrested all those years ago. Only that man had reason. This one had rage, raw, childish rage, like a dog that has tasted power for the first time, but has no clue what to do with it. What would you do now? A question flickered in his mind. Strike? Humiliate him? Or number? He chose something else. He took a step closer. Only about a foot separated them now. The girl seized the moment, wrenched her wrist free, and sprinted behind the bar. No one clapped. Everyone stayed silent. The atmosphere thickened. "I know who you are," Josh suddenly said, his voice quieter now. "You're Jason, the one who put my father away. You think you can be proud of that?" There was more than just anger in his voice. Something else, almost like pain. as if this guy didn't know what was expected of him. All he knew was one thing: be tougher than his father. "I don't think about it," Jason replied. "I see a guy acting like a coward. You want to be a man? Let the girl go and talk." Another silence enveloped the room. It was then that Josh snapped. He lunged forward, pushing Jason in the chest with both hands. "Don't talk to me like I'm some puppy," he roared. The shove was hard, but not unexpected. Jason took a half step back and immediately returned to his stance. His body remembered everything in an instant. "Made my choice," he muttered under his breath. His fingers clenched into fists. The people around them shifted, some standing up. The girl gasped, but no one intervened. Here it was. He stood before evil that hadn't yet fully revealed itself, and his move would decide, strike or give a chance. What would you do in his place? The bar froze. The air became dense like before a storm, and it seemed like just a snap of fingers would ignite everything. Jason stood, unmoving, while Josh was already in a frenzy. His shoulders twitched, his lips curled into a crooked grin, as if he didn't fully understand why he was shaking. "Come on," he squealed. "Hit me. Prove you're still somebody." The voices behind them grew louder. People were starting to whisper. Some pulled out their phones. A guy near the door stood up as if he was about to intervene, but thought better of it. It was like an arena with only 2 gladiators and hundreds of indifferent eyes. Jason saw everything in detail: a drop of sweat on Josh's temple, the barely noticeable trembling finger on his hand, the glass someone had left at the edge of the counter, the one that was about to fall. He didn't see strength, only fear. Not rage, but emptiness. "You carry the name of the man who brought too much dirt into this city," he said calmly. "But that doesn't make you him." "Not yet." Josh's smile faded. For a second, something resembling doubt flickered in his eyes. He stepped back, and that's when the unexpected happened. The glass, the one at the edge, crashed to the floor and shattered. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot. Josh flinched, took another step forward, but not to attack. He looked lost. And then, almost out of nowhere, Tom stepped in, holding a bar stool. "Kid," Tom said calmly, placing it in front of him, "sit down, or you'll fall." The world seemed to crack. Josh stood there, breathing heavily, looking at Jason, then at Tom, then into nothingness. And something inside him began to change. Not breaking, more like wavering. But change is unpredictable. What if he hits after all? What if it's a trap? What if he just wants to be stopped? The bar froze again. Josh stood as if between 2 realities. And no one, not Jason, not Tom, not even Josh himself, knew which one he would choose. Time stood still, but Jason couldn't afford to be slow. He could see that Josh still didn't fully understand what was happening. His face was like a mask filled with anger and uncertainty, mixed into one. Jason didn't want to fight. This wasn't personal. But when the kid took a step forward, his instincts kicked in immediately. He knew that if he didn't stop him now, a fight would be inevitable, and he wasn't going to let this clumsy kid ruin everything that could have been. "You'll make a mistake if you keep going," Jason said, his voice as cold as ice. "I don't want to cripple you." But Josh wasn't listening. With gritted teeth, he lunged at him, trying to punch him in the face with full force. It happened so fast it felt like a slow-motion shot to everyone else. But to Jason, time seemed to speed up. He saw every muscle in the guy's body, every movement. The punch was strong but off-target. Jason dodged, feeling the warmth of Josh's body as he missed. He grabbed him by the elbow, shifted the kid's heavy arm, and slightly leaned in to throw him off balance. The next moment, Jason sharply pulled him down, and the kid crashed to the floor like a toy that lost its power. The shouts behind the bar grew louder. Someone jumped up, someone screamed, trying to figure out what was happening. Jason kept Josh on the floor, his hand pressing the kid's neck to the concrete. He was strong, without excess emotion. It was simple: movement, precision, mastery. "See, this can be solved differently," he said calmly, looking at the kid's face, which still hadn't understood how it was possible. Josh tried to break free, but Jason, unhurried, used his own strength against him. He twisted, pulled Josh's arm up to his knees, and without giving him a chance to rise, yanked his arm out of the joint. It wasn't torture, it was control. Not aggression, but discipline. Jason was completely calm. He knew he could finish this for good, but what if he gave him a chance? What if this kid made the choice himself to not repeat his father's mistakes? The bar fell silent. Even the bartender froze, unsure whether to approach. The girl, whom Josh had been trying to humiliate, stood off to the side, watching. She didn't know what to feel. She hadn't asked Jason to intervene. But now she could only watch as the world of her life, turned upside down just minutes ago, slowly returned to equilibrium. "You don't want to die, Josh. You've just lost your way," Jason said quietly. He looked at the guy, who was no longer trying to resist. Josh, sweating, exhaled, trying to catch his breath, but his eyes again filled with rage. It seemed like he thought that if he didn't attack now, he wouldn't be a man. But Jason understood that there was a different struggle here, an internal conflict, one even his old body could barely comprehend. Why was he so stubborn? Why couldn't he let go of his hatred for his father? And what if someone showed him another way? Jason didn't back down. His hands didn't shake, his eyes didn't betray any emotion, and his breathing remained steady. Josh lay on the floor, barely propped up, glaring with a threatening look, but without any real strength. He was still trying to pretend he controlled the situation, even though he had already been defeated. "Get up, if you can," Jason said, looking down at him condescendingly. "Or do you want me to continue?" Josh gritted his teeth, his face turning red from anger and shame. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't obey. Everything hurt, and every attempt to stand sent sharp pain through his shoulders and back. Jason had been too precise, too fast, and he knew when to stop. The bar went still again, and this moment was important, the moment when Josh could make his choice. He could admit that the person in front of him wasn't an enemy, but just someone who was willing to give him a chance. Jason crouched down beside him, not looking away. "You want me to beat you, Josh?" he asked, his voice not as a threat, but as a real question. "I could, but you're not the kind of guy who wants to die. You're alive. Do you understand?" Josh didn't answer. His gaze was clouded with anger and shame. He turned away, unable to meet Jason's eyes. "Did you think you could be like your father, driven by hatred?" Jason continued, his words hitting deep. "Your father was strong, yes, but he didn't know any other way. Do you see your choice? You can be strong, but differently. You can be alive." Silence hung in the bar. Everyone was watching. The girl stood at the counter, her eyes filled with both gratitude and confusion. This wasn't just a spectacle. It was a moment that could change everything. Josh got up on his knees, gasping for air. He still couldn't understand what had happened, but there was something new in his eyes. A question, a hint of doubt, something he'd been hiding all along. The gap between who he'd been taught to be and who he could become. "You can stand, Josh, but to do that, you need to let go," Jason continued, now almost whispering. "Let go of that weight of hatred. You don't have to be someone's memory. You can become someone else." Josh got up, struggling to find his footing. He looked at Jason, and there was no longer the certainty he once had. There was something else. Confusion, almost emptiness, but at the same time, something new. He knew that the choice he was facing now would change his life. But was he ready to make it? "You know where I'll be tomorrow morning," Jason said, already turning toward the exit. "If you want to start fresh, come by. There will be a place waiting for you." He walked out into the foggy evening, not looking back. Silence remained behind him. Only Josh, standing in the center of the room, replayed his words in his head, over and over. Hours passed, but Josh couldn't shake the feeling. He sat at the table in his empty house, his fingers tracing an old photograph of his father, Randy. In the picture, he was young, with a smirk on his face and a gun in his hand, ready for any fight. And now, with his father gone, with his name reduced to part of a story, Josh felt his world slowly falling apart. He tried to hold on to that hatred, that anger, like a strong anchor that supposedly kept him afloat. But with every word Jason had said, with every look, he felt that anchor pulling him down. And maybe not at the moment when he was still holding his ground. No, it was at the moment when that anchor could no longer keep him on this path. It was too heavy. Do you want to be someone, Josh? Jason's questions haunted him like an echo. He remembered every word, every glance, but he didn't know how to respond to them. All night, Josh lay in bed, unable to sleep. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, emotions blending into chaos. He had believed his life was meant to be different, harsh and merciless, like his father's. But now that didn't seem as appealing. He felt the emptiness he had always concealed. When morning finally came, his decision was unexpected. He got up, put on his jeans and an old t-shirt that his father used to wear to work. Josh looked at a photograph, slipped it into his pocket, and headed for the door. Today, he decided not to be the one who destroys everything around him. Today, he decided to try to be someone else. The bar was empty. It hadn't opened yet, and Tom was nowhere in sight. Josh stood at the door, unsure of what to do. He had always been one of those guys who didn't believe in chances, in possibilities, in people who talked about other ways. It all seemed absurd, but something inside pushed him to go in. He stepped inside and felt a strange heaviness in the air. At that moment, his gaze met the bartender's. The man didn't say anything, but there was something in his look that resembled acknowledgement, something that no longer kept him in place. "You came," the bartender said as Josh approached the counter. Josh didn't know what to say. He just sat there, silent. Maybe it's not so bad to be alive, he thought. But the question remained in his head, and his answer depended on what he chose today. When Tom came in, he immediately saw Josh, but there was no surprise, no judgment, only a slight smile as if he knew this moment would come eventually. "You came," he said, pouring coffee. "Are you ready to start?" Josh stood up, feeling the weight of his old world lift off his shoulders. He didn't know what would come of it, but he was ready to try. He was ready to see the world differently. "I'm ready," Josh said, his voice now firmer. Tom nodded, and Jason, standing at the door, smiled quietly when he saw them together. He knew that the guy had made a choice. Time would show that his strength wasn't just in defeating, but in giving someone a chance. The world kept moving despite everything that had happened in the bar. The morning after was like any other: rain, wet streets, and slippery roads. But for Josh, everything felt new, unfamiliar, but somehow bright and free. He woke up early despite the sleepless night, and even in the darkness he felt his life starting to change. He no longer knew who he was. No, not in the sense that he was lost. He knew he stood at a new crossroads. But what did that mean for him? In the past, his day would begin with thoughts of how to use power, how to show dominance. But now, he inserted the key into Tom's garage lock and opened the door. Inside, it was empty. Only the light from the dim lamps flickered above the tools. Josh didn't know what he was supposed to do, how to start something, but he felt at peace. Quiet. No fear. Just a lot of work. Tom entered a few minutes later, holding a cup of coffee. He nodded to Josh, looked at his hands holding the tools with curiosity, as if it was something important. "So, kid, you ready to work?" Tom asked. Josh looked up and felt his gaze harden. He was ready. "Yeah, ready," he replied. His eyes no longer held anger or pain. Now there was something else, understanding and determination. He didn't know how long this path would last, but now he could walk it, and that in itself was important. The day passed quickly. The work at the auto shop wasn't difficult, but Josh had enough strength to do everything right. He felt his body filling with confidence again, but not with brute strength. He used his mind, not his fists. He was good, maybe not perfect, but good. When Josh headed home that evening, he once again felt a strange lightness that he hadn't felt before. It wasn't easy. No, it was hard. A new path is always difficult. But he finally understood that he could make a choice, and that choice wasn't for anyone else but himself. But the night brought with it a strange sense of doubt. Josh returned home, sat in silence, and listened to his breathing. He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. He didn't yet know how to truly live this new path. He didn't know where his place in this world was, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to be the person he was before. The phone on the table lit up, and he saw a message. It came from an old acquaintance, people he had left behind. "Are you out of your mind? Come back. This isn't your path." He put the phone down. His life didn't depend on other people's words. He was here now, and maybe something or someone would help him, but the decision was his to make. The morning brought something special, not because it was easier, but because it was different. Josh woke up with the feeling that he was no longer the guy he had been yesterday. But, as it often happens, one day doesn't determine your fate. It's every new step that counts, and Josh was ready to walk. He was back in the workshop. Often small steps don't seem important, but at that moment he realized everything he was doing was the first step towards a new life. Every bolt, every action, they were adding up to something bigger, not just physical work. This was his internal battle, building a new self. No more hiding, he thought as he tightened another screw. No more living with the burden of other people's mistakes. Jason, as promised, didn't leave him alone. He kept coming to the workshop, not interfering with the work, but observing carefully. He didn't say a word, but everything that happened spoke for itself. All Josh had to do was watch, learn, and go his own way. Josh was sitting in the backyard of the workshop when one of his old acquaintances approached him. He knew his face, even knew that he wasn't a friend, but still looked at him with respect. "So you came back, huh?" he asked, not hiding his surprise. "Yeah," Josh answered without extra words. "I'm on a different path now." The old acquaintance smirked, but there was something wary in his gaze. "Don't you think you're losing everything you could have had?" he asked, trying to push Josh back to his old habits. "Your father had his way. You could be great if you followed him." Josh looked at him, his gaze steady, his voice calm. "You don't understand. I don't have to be like him. I want to be myself." The words were simple, but inside there was something strong. Words he couldn't have said to himself just a few days ago. The old man was silent, nodding. He seemed to understand that he couldn't bring Josh back to the old path. Not many people were capable of making the choice Josh had made. Jason stood by the window, watching Josh work again. This day wasn't special in itself, but it had become meaningful. Jason saw how Josh was changing. It wasn't just physical work, and it was something more. It was the restoration of his soul. When they were both done for the day, Jason approached Josh. "So, how's the work?" he asked. Josh didn't answer immediately. He just wiped his hands clean, looked Jason in the eye, and nodded silently. "Thanks," he said. "You gave me a chance. Now I'm deciding what happens next." Jason, despite his usual restraint, smiled. "This is your path, Josh, and you're not alone. But you need to walk it without looking back. You don't have to be what they taught you to be. You can be someone else. but that decision is yours. Josh looked at his old friend, not as a mentor now, but as someone who showed him the way. He understood that his life belonged to him, and he would rebuild it step by step, no matter what had come before. And so, when Josh left as the sun set, his life was no longer what it had been. He drove, not knowing what lay ahead, but knowing one thing: he was alive. And that was more than most could say. He understood that he didn't need to be great by someone else's standards. It was enough to be honest with himself. Maybe not everyone would believe in his new path, but for him that was more important than anything: to walk without looking back.